How do we get deep?
What?
Let's get into that.
Hey everybody, I'm Nate Warnock.
I'm Andrea Warnock.
And you're catching us on Marriage Monday. This is a show that we do on the Marriage by Design channel, where we take a look at what God has to say about marriage and how we can practically implement that into our own marriages.
And this month we're talking about communication. And we've talked for the first 3 weeks about maybe some barriers to communication and what the difference is between communication and dialogue. And then today we're talking about some practical tips on how to communicate better with your spouse, and not even just with your spouse, but with some of it is with just relationships that you have in general.
That's right. So we want today to be super practical.
Yeah.
So the format we're going to kind of take today is similar to what we took last week, where we talked about the different barriers that can enter into dialogue and communication between you and your spouse. And Andrew, you're certainly right. This enters into communication other than just with your spouse. But, of course, as this is Marriage Monday, we are contractually obligated to tie it directly into marriage. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to pop through, 8 or so different practical things that can be implemented to improve communication and dialogue in your marriage. And really what we would say is just pick maybe 1 or 2 of these and commit to implementing those into your marriage right now. Maybe jot down some notes on each of the 6 or 8, sit down with your spouse, or have your spouse, listen to this episode themselves and go from there.
Great. So, should we just start off with the first one?
Yeah, let's launch in.
All right.
Fire away.
I think the first, and this sounds so obvious, but take an interest in your spouse. And that comes from, a lot of times we can get so self-focused in life and so self-focused in our relationships, and it's all about how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and all that sort of thing. But it's super important that we take an interest in our spouse, what's going on in their lives and what's going well and what are they struggling with and all that, and just being really wanting to know your spouse and know them so well. And that goes for other relationships too. Take an interest in people in general.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So practically, what does this look like?
Right. So for us, I'm very interested in Nathan and what he does during his days when he's not with us. So of course, Nathan works outside the home, and I will ask him what's going on. I see all of his appointments that he has. So how'd this appointment go? Or I know you were saying that you were having this kind of hard conversation or whatever. So I know generally kind of what's going on with him, but I'll ask him specifically, how did these things go? What are you struggling with at work? I don't know. I just want to know, because that's what he's spending a lot of time away from us doing his own thing, but I want to be a part of that.
Right, and that can tie right into that deeper level of communication that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where you and I might have a conversation where you ask me about a sales call and I respond in a way where you go, man, I wonder why that made him angry, or I wonder why that made him sad. And you might go, it's not an appropriate time to ask about that while he's at work and we're on the phone or we're text messaging back and forth or whatever. But then later that night or in the next few days when we sit down, that might be a good end to that deeper level of communication for you to be able to say, hey, I noticed when we talked about that sales call you went on earlier this week, you sounded like you were pretty upset about it.
Yeah.
What is it that upset you?
Yeah.
So taking an interest in what goes on during the day can totally be an inroad into communication. I would also say for guys in particular, this is a huge opportunity for us, because guys can get into that mode where we're at work and that's what we're all about, and we're just plugging away and getting done the stuff that we want to get done during the day, and it's like our spouse and family doesn't exist
Mhm.
while we're at work doing work. And that's not just for people where your wife is a stay-at-home mom. I'm talking about, she might be off doing her job, but particularly for guys, we can get in that one-track mind sort of mentality. And we've had a number of couples that, we've had the opportunity to meet and talk at a deeper level with over the years. And a huge number of them, the wife says, it would really mean a lot to me if my husband would just call me during the day.
Sure.
And, it's sort of this validation of, hey, even though I'm here doing my job, I'm still thinking about you and I still care about you.
Yep.
And man, we live in the golden age of being able to do that. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. A lot of you guys that are watching this or listening to this probably remember your parents, or maybe even you yourselves, back in the day where you went to work and then, if your spouse wanted to get a hold of you or you wanted to get a hold of your spouse, you called, some general receptionist picked up, then maybe you got passed to the secretary for your spouse's job, and then she took a physical message because he was off doing something else and walked it down and put it on his desk, and at some point maybe you would get a phone call back. That's not that long ago. I mean, now we've got about 1 million ways to text message, instant message, send audio files back and forth to each other, send, all
Marco
that.
Polo,
And there's Marco Polo, there's Vox, there's all these different things. So, and on top of that, there's great reminder software on our phones to just send us a reminder, hey, touch base with Andrea.
Yeah.
Right? And it might take that little reminder to take an interest, and all these things snowball into being able to have deeper levels of communication.
Yeah, and if this is a struggle as far as like you feel, there's some days where I feel like there's not much to talk about, or I'm struggling I'm trying to take an interest, but I'm just struggling to find really anything. I may ask Nathan, what are your highs and lows of today? And that can be a good inroad.
Yeah, totally. But taking an interest is huge, right? And not just in job, but in hobbies and things too. I mean, being a student of your spouse and learning about, hey, what are they into? And even if it's not something you're into, you're one with your spouse. So from that regard, it's something you're into, whether you're into it or not. And taking at least a fake it till you make it a little bit approach to being into some of the things they're into, right? As long as they're not sinful things. I think that really can help building those bridges to having better communication. Yeah.
So the next thing that we're going to talk about is passing the ball. And I know in one of the first 2 weeks we talked about this. And it's one of those things that is super effective to help with communication, but can also feel a little awkward, but it's worth the awkwardness at first in order to better your communication. So passing the ball is to have better dialogue, as far as I'm speaking and you're listening, and then I listen and you speak. So my parents taught me this when I was younger, when they were teaching me at a young age to have conversation. Usually it really related to adults. Like, this is how you have conversation with adults. This is how you'll have conversation when you are an adult. Because kids converse back and forth fine. But that you need to take an interest in conversation. You need to be a part of conversation and dialogue with adults. So they introduced this to me when I was younger. So, it looks like when I have the ball, I'm talking and the other person is listening. And then when I pass it to you, that means I'm not talking anymore. And I'm taking an interest in you and I'm listening.
I have the ball and she's still talking.
Yes. I'm doing it wrong. But, yes, okay, I am talking, sorry, when I'm talking, there's a time for me to talk and all that, and then I'm going to pass the ball, which means...
Now it's my turn to talk. This is a super effective thing, and look, you might be watching this and thinking, that's super childish. Well, maybe, but you may look at the communication you have right now with your spouse, and if you're being honest with yourself, go, our communication right now is really childish.
Yeah.
because I try to speak, he or she just interrupts me every chance they get, which makes me angry, and then I say mean things, and then they interrupt me to say mean things back to me, and it becomes chaotic. This is a really good tool, particularly for if you and your spouse struggle with interrupting.
Yeah.
Because the great thing about this is it's a physical representation of taking turns speaking. And it prevents the other person from, if they don't have the ball, they can be totally engaged in listening. And not only are they not interrupting, but I found it also limits that reaction we have where I'm going to formulate everything I'm going to say for the next 10 minutes right now, and then I'm just going to try, and whenever you pause to take a breath, I'm like, no, and that's the other thing is the ball is given up by the person talking. It's not taken. Right? This isn't football. So I speak, and Andrea doesn't raise her hand or start to kind of reach for the ball. She just sits and listens to what I have to say. And then once I've finished, then I hand her the ball and she goes.
It can also be a great tool when you have one person who is a heavy communicator and another person who has just gone into the background and allowed that person to dominate conversations. So it's helpful for both those things. But yeah, may feel and probably will feel very awkward, but I really encourage you to actually use a ball or some sort of object to pass back and forth for a while to get the hang of this is how dialogue happens.
Totally.
Yeah.
I would totally agree with that.
So next one is one that you had brought up.
Yeah, so another tool that we've used, and this can even be used in conjunction with passing the ball.
Yes.
In fact, I would encourage it in that regard. But it's formalizing your dialogue. Because remember what we talked about, dialogue is mutual communication back and forth for the purpose of understanding or for the purpose of resolution of an issue. So the way that this works is Andrea would speak, and then when she finishes speaking and it's my turn to respond, I would start by saying, what I hear you saying is, and then repeat what I understood her to be saying in my own words. And then at the end of that, I would say, is that correct? It not only validates that I've been listening to what she has to say, but it also gives her an opportunity to go, man, that wasn't what I was saying at all. And you would be amazed how often that's the case.
It's just things can get interpreted incorrectly sometimes.
This goes back to what we've spoken about on Marriage Monday in the past when we talked about love and respect. Men and women say and hear things differently. And so Andrea may be saying something and I may be hearing, hey, you really screwed up, I'm really mad at you, and I don't love you anymore, right? Because of my past, because of, just the way I'm hearing what she's saying. And if I'm able to say, okay, what I hear you saying is, you're really mad at me, I really screwed up, and you don't love me anymore, two positive things happen. One, she gets an insight into how I hear the things that she's saying, right? Because she may hear that and go, okay, that's just stupid. That's not what I was trying to say at all. But if I'm being genuine, it's an opportunity for her to go, man, he's really sensitive to when I speak this way, and I need to be careful of that as a ministry to him, right? As we've talked about, our job as spouses is to minister to one another. As a ministry to him, I'll take a different approach to sharing these kinds of things with him because he hears that as I don't love him anymore, right? And that's an extreme example. But so that's the first thing, is she has an opportunity to learn more about how I hear what she's saying. Second thing is it gives her an opportunity to go, no, that's not what I was saying. What I was trying to say is, and maybe rephrase it a little bit, so that we don't spend the next 45 minutes arguing over a misunderstanding.
Right. Yeah, it's really helpful.
Right. And again, is it super formulaic? You bet. Yep, it is super formulaic, right? It is awkward if you've not done this to get to a point where you say, okay, what I hear you saying is this. Is that correct? Right? I understand that's formulaic, but excuse me, but it's important. And certain. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, it feels less awkward over time. It becomes more natural. I think about that in the way of like apologies too. We have a very specific way we do apologies, which when we started doing that felt really weird, and now it feels super normal. So
right, and we'll teach that too at some point.
Yeah, so it's something that you do repetitively that just becomes a part of your life.
Yep.
Stops feeling weird at some point.
And it becomes a tool, right? Where you don't use it all the time, but maybe when you're having a tense conversation, that might be the time where you go, okay, what I hear you saying is, and your spouse won't go like, okay, weirdo, are you trying to make fun of me or what are you doing, right? Because they'll recognize that, okay, you're falling back, you're taking that tool out of your toolbox and really trying to make sure you understand what's going on in that conversation. So certainly not something you would say every time forever, but once you get in the habit, it becomes
or maybe you use it for your whole marriage in those times that you feel like we're missing each other somewhere.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it becomes a tool like that, for sure.
So the next one is having intentional time for confrontational communication and also those deep levels of communication.
Right. Yeah, so let's separate those out, right? So why do we do that?
So having those intentional times for, let's say there's an issue in your marriage that needs to be dealt with, and rather than just bringing that up at some random moment and kind of surprising your spouse, or if you're in a season of your marriage where things are just tense, like a lot. An example I would give is when Nathan and I were in that 2012, that time where he had just had an affair, was coming out of that, and we were a mess, but there was a lot to talk about. So we were in a season of our marriage where things were incredibly difficult, a lot of things that we needed to talk about and all that. So, but it can become so all-consuming if that's all the conversation we're always having, or if it's like I'm just bringing it up whenever I think about it. So having intentional time for confrontation at any point in your marriage is so good, because you both are like, okay, so on Tuesday after we put the kids to bed, we're going to be talking about this issue. I can wrap my head around that. I can think about what's important for us to talk about. I can prepare myself and know that I don't have to be trying to defend myself or trying to explain myself at any moment of the day. This is the time we're going to be dealing with this. It's, and I can be okay with knowing the rest of the time isn't going to be tense in that, oh my gosh, is he going to bring up this thing just at any whim?
Right. Can really help out with anxiety.
Yeah.
I mean, if you struggle with anxiety because you're in a tense part of your marriage, maybe you're in a kind of one of those valleys that we talk about where it just seems like things aren't great right now, and you're working through it, but it's taking time. That can be a really anxious time physically. I mean, it can be physically taxing. So
I think too, it's good for those people who may have some anger about something, and knowing that you need to hold it off till a certain time can help to tamp down that anger some and be more level-headed.
Right.
So maybe it's even like you have a quick blow up about something, and you both decide, you know what, let's not talk about this until later tonight.
Right.
Because then usually cooler heads prevail at that point. You've had some time to for that volcano to settle a little bit and think about it and hopefully pray about it.
Yep.
And then we find that it's more constructive discussion.
Right.
Communication.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the other just practical thing, particularly this is, I'll share as a guy because I'm a guy. But one thing, for me that I've found beneficial about this is there's times when you have an argument with your spouse or you didn't do something right or whatever, and there's this elephant in the room where you know you need to talk about this and she knows you need to talk about this, yet you're just sort of going along with your life, and that can really build up. But maybe you're going, you know what, I really don't want to talk about this right now. I think it's a good way to acknowledge it, but schedule a time for later. So you can kind of put your spouse at ease, because if your spouse is like my spouse, those can be really difficult times where you know, hey, we need to talk about something. We both know we need to talk about it, and you're not bringing it up. Why are you not bringing it up?
Yeah. So
for me to be able to say, hey, I know we need to talk about this. Can we talk about it tomorrow night?
Sure.
I'll bring it up and we'll talk about it. So that's a good positive way to do that.
And then also using specified times to have those deeper levels of communication.
Yeah.
A lot of the same reasons, because then you're not anxious. If you're somebody who struggles with those deeper levels of communication, you're not anxious that just at any moment we're going to try to have some, really deep dialogue.
Yeah.
You can even think about what are some things that are really important to talk to my spouse about, and that goes into being introspective.
Yeah.
That we can talk about, but just.
Yeah,
just kind of being prepared and knowing. And
the thing I've found about deeper levels of communication is it is a skill that must be practiced. Right? If it's not something that you made a practice of doing when you were dating or early married, it can be a really difficult thing to figure out how to get to those deeper levels of communication. And if you just happen to find this particular video, go back and take a look at our video in week 2, and I'll put, if you click that little eye right there, it will take you to that video. And in that video, we talk about the levels of communication. So that's what we're talking about for these next few that we're going to talk about getting to deep levels of communication. But it can be really difficult. And so a big part of that is I found that if you just try and go there, right? If you just sit down and you're like, hey, let's have a deep talk. It's kind of like, if I just walk up to you on the street and go, what's your favorite movie? And you're like, you have that put on the spot feeling. That can happen. And it can be really defeating, especially if one or the other of you really wants more deep communication. And so that person is pursuing it and you're going, right? It can be defeating. And so setting intentional time for deeper levels of communication can help you to brainstorm some things to talk about, which really leads us to our next thing, which is how to get to deeper levels of communication.
Yeah. One way is we have this book called 3,000 Questions About Me.
Yep.
And we got it off of Amazon. My friend Ellen had it at her place, and I saw it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. So we got it, and it's a great thing that there's 3,000 questions. Some are really deep, some are not. But
some are just fun.
Yeah, some are fun, but it's a really fun way to, hey, give me a number. And then I read that question, and some of them we have really long discussions about. So something like that is a really useful tool.
Yep, and I will put the link for that down in the description below. So if you want to take a look at that,
great,
it will be there.
What do you think is a good way to get into deeper levels of communication?
For me, nothing beats taking a few notes. I mean, just of things during the week, right? I mean, we talked about that situation earlier where you talked to me about a sales call I went on, and maybe I react in a way that makes you go, that was an odd reaction to that. The problem is when we sit down to talk, it's like you get that put on the spot feeling of like, I don't know what to say right now. For me, I don't think there's any harm in just flat cheating, right? And just writing down some things during the week so that when you sit down, it's like, well, let me pull up my notes from the week. And there are several times where it's like, hey, you mentioned something on Tuesday, and even a quote like, this is what you said. Can you tell me some more about that? Right? Remember, one of those deeper levels of communication, the first one of the deeper three, is sharing your feelings about facts and opinions. And so to be able to immediately get to that place of, you said this thing, that's a fact, right? And maybe the thing they said was an opinion, right? You said this. How are you feeling about that? Or what did you mean by that? Right? It immediately skips down to those deeper levels of communication and can go even deeper from there.
Mm-hmm. I think too, asking them, what are you praying about that I don't know about? You know, what's on your mind that I just don't know.
Sure.
Is helpful.
Yeah, here's another tip. If you're at a place in your marriage where you can be intimate and vulnerable enough with each other to pray as a couple, that's a huge. I mean, you want to talk about things to be able to talk about. You don't know your spouse until you have heard them pray, because there for sure will be things that they pray about that you're like, I didn't even know that was a thing, right? And I'm not talking about, make sure you carve out 2 or 3 hours a day to just, get it, right? I mean, I'm talking about, a couple minutes before you go to bed, if that's what works for you, or in the morning, or, whatever your flow is. But praying together, you get to hear those deeper things.
Right.
That if it's important enough to your spouse to take it to the Most High God, it's definitely important enough that you guys can talk about it together.
So I said something about introspection, to be introspective. And that's a huge tool for communication. And it seems weird, but how can you talk about how you feel about something if you don't even know yourself?
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in a previous week when we were talking about communication, but it's worth saying again. It's so important that you are introspective and that you're thinking about things that are important to you and how you feel about things that have happened and how you feel about what's going on in your day or things that are going on in the world, whatever. So if that's something that you recognize, that's really hard for me, or I don't really know how I feel about stuff, I would encourage you to just get going on that. At the end of every day, this is what I had to do when I realized, oh my gosh, I don't know how I feel about anything, except when I'm really mad about something. At the end of every day, think about 3-ish things that happen, like 3-ish, not tiny little things, but like things that defined your day. And how did that make me feel? And why? And all that sort of thing. And it can help if you're a journaler. That'd be great for you to journal. I am not, so I never did. But it was really good for me to think, okay, this happened today and I really loved that. Why did I love that? Why did that speak so much to just my general happiness about the day and all that sort of thing? So yeah. I think for those that struggle, that's a great way to start. And then that becomes a habit, and then for me, that became a habit, and then I started to just do that naturally throughout my day.
You could also start a YouTube channel where you do a diary every weekend, and then you will learn lots of things about your spouse.
Oh,
too, while you're shooting those videos.
That's true.
So I knew a guy once.
Yes. One that you had said was not ambushing.
Yeah, a zero ambushing policy in your home. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, particularly if you yourself struggle with, or you have a spouse that has struggled with honesty, I have found that one way you can minister to them is by not ambushing them with a difficult conversation. Mm-hmm. So ambush means you guys are you're having dinner, it's nice, you finish up dinner, you put the kids to bed, you're just sitting down, and you just hit them with that topic right out of the blue. And this kind of ties into the being intentional about setting time for confrontational conversations. But I have found that particularly if you want honesty and the truth, trying to do a gotcha moment is not going to work out. for you. I think we delude ourselves in our mind to think, well, if I just ask them out of the blue, they're going to slip up and tell me the truth. Well, in all likelihood, particularly if you have a spouse that struggles with dishonesty, you're putting them in a position where if their go-to is to be dishonest with you ambushing them is not going to trick them out of that. It's going to force them into it. And I'm not saying that doesn't make it wrong on their part. It does. I'm just saying if your goal is honesty and communication, setting a time where they have an opportunity to reflect on what they're going to say and choose to be honest with you is a way better way of doing that than, saying, hey, how was your day? What about this thing? Right? I mean, it's a great way to start an argumentative, kind of evil for evil where you're just going back and forth angrily at each other and putting them in a position to lie to just try and get out of the ambush.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the last thing that we're going to talk about is involving another couple.
Yeah.
So this is particularly helpful if you seem to talk in circles about something, or if you guys just get mean with each other in communication, typically in an argument. But if you feel like you're not getting anywhere or the arguments are getting mean, involve another couple that you trust, that's not going to take sides, that has the view of marriage that
that's key.
That's important. Not somebody who thinks that you should get divorced tomorrow, but has a good view of marriage. Involve them. And it may not even be that they have to give you advice or really be involved in that conversation. It may be that they're just there, and then you're on your best behavior, really, because somebody is listening to your conversation. Yeah. So that may really help to be on good behavior, so not taking jabs at your spouse. And it may help to have another couple there just to stay on topic. It may be that when you talk in circles, that couple may be able to say, this is the topic that we're discussing right now, and you're trying to go off on another topic, or you're trying to bring in the past that's not helpful right now. So let's just stay on point.
Totally. And excuse me. I mean, that's huge. It's huge for us. Later this year, we're going to do an entire month on mentors. And we'll probably get into this some more. So we hope you join us for that. We're going to have a guest couple on for the whole month. And really dig into what does it look like to have a mentor couple in your life. And this is a really great way to start that process of having a mentor couple in your life, because you need to be able to be transparent with them, and what better way to be transparent than to say, hey, we're really struggling with this particular conversation. Could you come over and spend some time just going through it with us? If you are a mentor couple, all right, maybe you're listening to this and going, hey, we just had a couple contact us about doing that. Just remember, it's not about you. So going into that, recognizing that your primary responsibility in that situation is to pray and keep them on dialogue, right? Keep them continuing not to fall into communication where they're just saying their points back and forth, but dialogue where you're really working towards resolution. That's your job, is to, one, pray, two, help keep them on point with truly, hey, let's try and reach resolution on this and not get caught in the bunny trails and the personal attacks and those types of things. Yep. Anything else, Pippi?
Nope.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the only other thing I would suggest is be intentional about praying into better communication and dialogue in your marriage, right? I mean, you may be watching this and going, my spouse doesn't have any relationship with the Lord and doesn't have any interest in that. And so, all this God stuff is not going to play with him or her, and that's fine, right? I mean, the Bible's clear. By you living out the gospel in your marriage, you may very well be the one that ends up resulting in them coming to saving faith in the Lord. So take heart in that, but also pray into that, right? Daily.
Yep.
I mean, we just talked last week in Testosterone Tuesday and Women Power Wednesday about the power of prayer. This is an opportunity for you to put that into practice in your marriage right now. And the Holy Spirit will honor that. Awesome.
Love it.
Guys, thanks so much for joining us. Hey, a couple things. If you would, down in the description below, subscribe to the podcast. That would be amazing. If you're watching it on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell so that you can be notified when new shows come out. That would be awesome. If you are listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, if you would like the podcast and leave us a positive review, that would mean a ton. Really focusing the next couple months on getting the word out to people. You guys have been amazing, and we want to share this with other people as well. So if you would do that, we would greatly appreciate it. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. And remember, God is for your marriage.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Marriage by Design. If you were impacted by this video, like it by hitting the thumbs up below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and once you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can be notified when new episodes release.
Excellent. Also, one of the huge pillars of our show is interactivity between us and you. So we would love you to comment down in the comments below if you have thoughts about this video, or if you have questions or other things you'd like to see considered in the future. In addition, if you'd like, you can email us. That's marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram @marriagebydesignpodcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching Marriage by Design Podcast. Finally, if you want to, you can tweet at us. We do have a Twitter account that is @MarriageXDesign. Thanks, and have a great day.